Order. First under general business is verification. The meeting was properly posted.
Yes, it was.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Clark. Second under general business is opportunity for public comment. We have one person signed up. Mr. Reese. Feel free.
Good evening. She's
Evening.
looking for a sign-up paper. We don't have any.
Well,
so
we'll let you speak. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I'll get her name.
I come tonight, I wanted to speak about consultants and how much this district budgets and spends a year for consultants. I find it a little absurd, the amount of money that we spend on consultants when we pay a lot of money for administrators who make a lot of money or are supposed to know how to run a school district. So they rely on someone else, the CYA, to tell them how to do their job, which we hire people to do. And that's redundant. If we spend all this money on administrative, why not let them go and just cut out the middleman and read what the consultants have to say ourselves and run the school district that way? I find it absurd and hard to fathom that districts rely so heavily on consultants when we pay them so much for these degrees that they have to be able to tell us how to run a school district that they don't know how to run. So that's what I wanted to talk about tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Is there anyone else in the gallery that would like to address the committee? Step forward and be heard.
Hi, Marilyn Granger, and I'm here regarding the board's decision this past week about overturning what their original decision was in June. In June, you guys, I'm sure, had a lot of discussion and you looked into things thoroughly and you made your decision 9-0. That's excellent. And people were happy until the protesters got into the game and started to threaten you, go to your places of employment, make ugly phone calls, which is really a sad thing. But then we all know they are bullies. And bullies, if you don't stand up to a bully, they get stronger. They don't go away. The next time an issue comes up they don't like, you can count on all these ugly things again, only worse, because that's what bullies do until they get their way. And unfortunately, 5 board members bent to the bullies. 4 stood strong, and I commended them. And the other thing is, our children in school are often bullied. And we don't teach them to give in to the bully. We teach them how to positively react and get rid of the bully. And we teach them to ask for help. But this board has set a terrible example to the kids how to deal with a bully, because you caved and you gave in to the bully. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you for your comment. Yeah. Can you, ma'am, can you give your address to Mr. Clark? We require it on a form. Don't say it out loud. But Mr. Clark will get it for you. Thank you. Alrighty. That concludes our general business. Next up are action items. Did you want to move up the HVAC report before the action items, Darren?
No, mine. 'cause
Yep,
there's
nope, that's
several
fine.
people here.
For sure, for sure. So we are adjusting the order of business a little bit, where we are actually going to hear our first discussion information item, which is the HVAC report.
Yeah, if Scott and Joe, Scott's here from Ring and Do, and if you remember, they were selected to do the district-wide analysis. They had also helped us with the referendum work and the HVAC work that we completed there. Kurt Wiebelhaus is our owner's rep on the referendum projects, and then Joe Hines is our lead HVAC person here in the district. So wanted to provide an opportunity for any questions you might have. I thought I'd lead off tonight with Scott just kind of walking through their process, not the whole study, because if you looked at the study, it goes on for 40 or 50, 60 pages, but just some methodology outlines, and then I have a PowerPoint that I'll walk the committee through. Just so you know, I think I put it in an email to you. The complete study is out in board docs, so anyone in the public who wants to go and take a look, it's there for their review. So, Scott, if you wouldn't mind, just quick kind of
Sure.
snapshot of
Yeah, absolutely.
methodology used.
Absolutely. So, I guess a little history back, where this report came from. To begin the report, what our first step was is actually going through the schools, looking at every piece of equipment, doing some air sampling, and then based on what we saw, and that included just the equipment, the distribution, and some sampling of air change rates randomly throughout the district for the air change rates, just to get a good sample of where things kind of stood. And as you can see in the report, things were kind of varied, and that's where everything kind of generated from. We took that data, looked at it, assessed it, and then gave recommendations based on what we saw in the field and how it compared across, and kind of did a ranking throughout the district as well. The equipment that was in more need of repair, and stuff that we thought was good. So that's kind of and then I think you're going to go into more of the recommendations and things that we kind of talked over, but that's kind of a really brief, real quick assessment of what we did.
So I'm going to start out by providing some history and some, I guess, just base data for everyone who's watching or here in this room about the district and our size and the different platforms of HVAC we have. We're not asking for any action tonight. This is a big topic, big dollars potentially, and I think it'll eventually roll into the Esser funds and other district resources. So don't be sitting here tonight thinking, oh my God, at the end of all this, I'm asking for you to take any action. It's a larger issue than that. So just quick background. Last fall, the board directed the administration to complete a full analysis of our HVAC systems, as we've mentioned, and Ring and Do was selected to take on that duty. We did get quotes on that, but with Ring and Do already on site and familiar with several of our buildings because of the referendum work, it was just a natural transition to make that selection. And then a lot of that, if you remember about this time last year, HVAC systems and air exchange rates and all those things, it seems like a lifetime ago, but was a very hot topic and rightfully so for the situation that we were all in. So that's where the conversation kind of came from, even though the HVAC topic goes back to even the referendum planning, but not on a district-wide basis because of the scale that would have been involved. One thing I thought I'd put in here, and it's really, if you've been around long enough, you see how things can change, where we were and where we are. Up until I would say that around 2010 or 15, whenever we talked HVAC, whenever we talked those systems, it was always about energy savings. It was always about the dollar. It was about balancing budgets, being good overseers of taxpayer dollars. And at some point during the 2000 teens, even before COVID, the transition was occurring where it was becoming more about a healthier environment and air exchange rates and longer run times, those types of things. And then certainly COVID accelerated that whole approach to that. And I don't think it's that you can't accomplish both, but the investment it takes to accomplish both really effectively is where the hurdle comes. So our facilities, we have 13 elementary schools, 4 middle schools, 4 high schools, and then we have 5 auxiliary service or idle sites, currently 26 total and about 2.4 million square feet of space. And as I've said many times, they're all different. Every floor plan, every heating system, how we use the buildings. Some buildings have pools, some people, some of them don't, some have field houses, some don't. So it's a very diverse conversation in terms of our facilities. As I mentioned, the full report is available in board docs. It contains every school building. I didn't have them do the service building or Lindholm. I figured our focus was on students and instruction. And our maintenance crew is already addressing some of the things that we'll talk about in the findings that Ring and Do came up with. So here is their recommendations from the study is white. I just cut and paste them into this PowerPoint presentation, and in green is just kind of the highlights of where we are as a district in addressing those things. So codes and those things change over time, so things that aren't currently under code or work under code have already been removed, or I think we're complete with that, Joe?
Correct.
Yeah, we've already done that in-house. Here are the next recommendation, and the first few are kind of baseline recommendations in my mind to get us to the point where we can start talking about new equipment and new retrofitting of equipment to adjust to different filtration levels, et cetera. Professionally clean the interior and power wash each air handling unit. Really go through and clean up our equipment. We have an RFP that's out, and those results are due this week. This is a smaller issue, but it's one that we can do to improve our systems. Straight and bent fins within the air handling coils. Again, we have an RFP for that. Professionally clean and return air ductwork at all facilities. The RFP is coming in on that. And it took us a long time, and Ring and Do had to help us with that, because you really have to lay out who's in charge of what areas of this. Otherwise, a project like this would just become more finger pointing and who's supposed to do this. So it took us quite a while to come up with a RFP document that we thought would garner the best results, and we'll have those results tabulated at the end of this week. Next one is determine the minimum outside air required for each major air handling system at all the facilities, and rebalance the minimum outside air damper positions. We talked about air exchange rates last summer, and that work will do. So again, it's really getting the system right, running where we think it can and maximizing what equipment we have at each building. The bottom bullet is the recommendation is to get to a minimum of a MERV 13 filtration level. You need a system that can handle a MERV 13, because if you put a real strong filter on a system that's not designed to push that air through that filter, the whole system's going to suffer in performance. So we have to identify those as well. Continue to maintain the increased air exchange rates. We started this last year, 2 hours before and 2 hours after occupancy. That's been done. But the next one is one that I think is a conversation we can have at some point, provide a secondary methodology, novel technology. We talked plasma ionization, I think it was last, and we just decided our systems weren't ready to have that added to them, so we backed off on that and took this review route instead. So those things are things we can certainly talk about in the future, but again, I think we need to get to a standard in our buildings that allow us to move forward from that benchmark. Start planning for eventual replacement of equipment that is at or past the medium time, or what recommended anticipation life cycle is for the equipment. And we have quite a list. It's not all the equipment we have, we have quite a list of equipment that can be replaced. We've prioritized it. That'll get us a long way down the track, but also it moves that dollar threshold for the cost. One snapshot of that I thought was important to point out in the HVAC study was 93% of all of our major air handling units are beyond their anticipated lifespan. Anticipated lifespan can be an engineering-driven, true data-driven thing, or it can be a sales pitch-driven thing. So I asked Ring and Do to say, all right, what equipment do we have that's 2 times beyond your anticipated life? Because then you're getting out there. We have systems that have been in our buildings 50, 60 years. So I asked them to break it out further. I think this is a truly an engineering-driven study, but if you've been on the board long enough, or in my role, you've heard anticipated life cycle a lot, and everyone has a different opinion on what that can be. And then when we look at developing our plan to go forward, scope. If we do strictly a vertical, what I consider a vertical approach to this, we just go down and we replace the air handling units, the major air handling units, but don't get into controls, don't get into AC, expanding AC, don't get into expanding what I call horizontally into a broader topic. I think what we are looking at and the potential path that we're looking at is kind of a blend of the two, because there's some efficiency of doing the controls when you're doing the major air handling systems. The downside of that is you can't cover as much square footage. The upside is you end up with a better product in the square footage of your buildings that you can touch. So again, I think it's a blend, but you have to make that decision as we move forward, or if we decide to move forward in a major way. So the potential path forward, again, this isn't a hard recommendation, but this is where, if we were given, if you were asked the question, Darren, what do you think needs to be done? This is the list that we came up with. The ultimate goal, and again, to me, the ultimate goal is to get to MERV 13 filtration with the systems that make MERV 13 filtrations work at every site. When I say every site, keep in mind, some of our sites are air handling units, some of them are steam heat, some of them are forced air, some of them are run by big rooftop units. So there's different issues with all of those, but a general rule is try to get to MERV 13 filtration and move forward from there. Some people have talked, we've had a parent who's been very good and is really studying this topic. You have an email from her on your desk tonight, and I think you got it electronically as well. That's been brought up. Well, do you do like HEPA filtration in every building or every room and all that? I guess I lean towards building-wide, larger service area equipment upgrades. I think it's a longer-term solution. Now, COVID makes it a fuzzier decision. I can't question that either. But our recommendation would be go with the larger air handling units, centralized filtration is a better long-term solution for the school district, not only for COVID, but allergies and all the other things that we've talked about in the past about air quality. All existing major air handling units that are MERV 13 compatible, we can upgrade. But a lot of the units, as we mentioned before, need to be replaced for several reasons. So we took kind of a multi-layer approach to coming up with this plan. And again, this is just something to help frame the conversation and provide some scale to you in terms of the dollars we're looking at. We would replace 16 of the air handling units of the 21 that were outlined in the Ring and Do study. The ones that we aren't doing, I think, are all at non-instructional sites, if I remember. And then our district staff would add 4 more units onto that list to come up with a list of 20 units that would be addressed in this plan. And again, this could be a multi-year plan. It's just our priority up to 20 units. We touch, I think, 10 schools by doing that. This is a chart that tries to give you an idea of why MERV 13. The red line that just goes straight across, if you look at the 0.3 to 1.0 micron filtration level, that gets us to COVID, is my understanding. I'm not a medical doctor, but and the MERV 11 would get you there, but the MERV 13 you can see is a significant jump where you're in the 50 to 74% range. So we would be beyond what people may consider the kind of the baseline MERV 11, and that would be our target at this point. This chart's also in the study too, if anyone wants. I know it's hard to read probably for people who are viewing this. So again, this is just the math again of, we had 21, we took out 5 because it was non-instructional sites, and then we prioritized 4 units. Again, potential scope, we have to identify, what efficiencies are worth it. Is it worth doing the controls and the VAV boxes, which don't ask me to tell what that is, but it's important from what everyone tells me. But all that, how far do you go? Kind of like we did with the middle schools. Our approach with the middle schools, not only on a renovation side, but on the HVAC side, is we don't plan on being back here. We're going to come in, we're going to do it right, we're going to do it thoroughly, and then we're going to move on. But the last bullet's the most critical one. The final scope of work is going to be determined by the board. That's your call. We'll provide you with all the information if you would like a recommendation. We hope this priority list provides you a list of options. So here's the math behind it and where we think we are. Recommended improvements from Ring and Do is $4.86 million. We have run this past a couple of firms to firm up these budget numbers, but again, the bid process will tell you how much it really costs. Those earlier bullets that we went through, the recommendations about kind of cleaning up our systems, balancing, cleaning out the air ducts, all of that we're estimating at $860,000. And then the things that we added in terms of the control systems and things like that we would like to see replaced is $4 million. And then they're, here's more detail. I don't think people need me to read through Unit R22 at Lowell and all that, but there is a method to this. So even if the board says, well, Darren, we're not going to spend that much, it's half that or a third that, this is the list along with the Ring and Do information. This is our prioritized list of where we would go with this type of work. And again, this is, PowerPoint slides are also in board docs too for anyone who wants to actually read this in greater detail. But you can see a lot of our schools are touched. Some of it's controls only, some of it's actually air handling unit systems. So all of this would come to $9 million. Esser conversation. I think that's a district reserves conversation. I think how many years do you want to try to tackle this, or are we fine where we are? But I thought I should frame it out in terms of scope and cost. Then lastly, as I mentioned before, this is a very complex and costly topic. Every building will have its own unique solutions. Even sections of buildings, especially like a south or a north, will have within its own building will have different solutions more than likely. The second bullet, as I mentioned, in October we start long-range budget conversations with Esser, being part of that conversation. We would like to move ahead with the cleaning of the air ducts, certainly about $500,000 of those early bullet recommendations. The cleaning of the air ducts, the cleaning of the coils, balancing. Am I missing? So, again, not a firm recommendation, just baseline information. We can answer any technical questions, or Joe's here to answer any district-specific questions you might have.
I don't know if you can answer this, but I'm going to look at Scott. And how do we compare to other districts?
Based on the age of the buildings, it's very comparable, right? I mean, this is based on the construction and the engineering is done at the time from when all the buildings were constructed, very similar, right? Everything was done to that standard at the time, kind of like you spoke to, right? There was everything, so comparable.
So I went through and I read all the comments that you had on each building. And I noticed many times you brought up a comment, I don't have it memorized, but it was in good condition for the age, well maintained, but definitely past the life
Right.
of what life expectancy.
Yep.
And I think that that's a kudos to the people in the district who were working on that, trying to keep things as efficient as and use things as long as we possibly can. And I think that has been the attitude of this district, as you pointed out in the very beginning, to be cost conscious about how we approach spending those monies and being frugal in that manner. Do any districts take it beyond MERV 13? Are there any that have gone the direction of going up to the HEPA grade?
I haven't seen districts go beyond MERV 13. MERV 13 is kind of becoming a newer standard based on just the way people have gone, and the efficiency of filters have gotten better, so it doesn't tax the equipment as much as older MERV 13 filters did. So they're able to get the same production out of the equipment as they were with a lesser filter, we'll say, right? So no, I guess as far as going up to like a HEPA filter, not really.
Okay. And what kind of environments typically would go up to a HEPA
Hospitals.
filter? Okay.
That's healthcare. Yeah, HEPAs are typically healthcare.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. I think I saw in the summary there's an opportunity for 3 schools to have AC added. I think it was Prairie, Hawthorne, and someone else. What was the other one? Oh, yeah, Lowell, Prairie, and Hillcrest. Are there any others we could add in there where it's needed?
Yeah, we had a chart, and I forgot to add it to this version of the PowerPoint. We're kind of all over. People ask, well, what buildings have air conditioning? Just about all of us in some sections of the building. So I had Joe break down, just kind of eyeballing it. It gets broken down in kind of quartiles. 25% or less of the square footage is AC, and then it's kind of 25 to 50. We have another cluster. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, to add it to new areas for some of the equipment would mean changing that equipment as well. Unless the board said, AC in these buildings is our driver. So it can be done. It's just a matter of the age and the equipment and that larger conversation.
On there, we looked at, the units that were bringing this report could be replaced. And we looked at it and so, okay, if that unit didn't have AC in it already, that's the time to.
Kurt, you want to speak into your microphone?
Yeah, you're closer.
That's the time to add it, is when that unit's being replaced. So that's how we identified the ones that we identified. Then if you look further down on the list, there are some other AC units that have an outdated, the R22, which is obsolete. It's very expensive to get that. So there are some other cooling upgrades in those other units by upgrading the R22. One of the buildings has the old window-style air conditioning units that are difficult to control. You rely on the staff member. That one is in there to more of a central type where you can manage it from a central. So there's some cooling upgrades with it as well. But that was kind of the methodology of putting it on the list.
Thank you.
So when you talk about air conditioning these buildings, are we talking rooftops? Are we talking RTUs?
There's a mixture of air handlers and rooftop units, right?
Okay. So how much of I know how many units need to be replaced, but how much of this system is actually being replaced? Because there's a lot more to the system than the air handler or the RTU, because when you go to a MERV 13 system, you're talking the static pressures are pretty high. And I doubt any of our ductwork in most of our buildings are going to be able to handle it. So are we talking about switching out actual, the ductwork and the squirrel cage, all the blowers and everything? Or what are we, I mean, it's a lot more involved than just putting a curb down and swapping out a rooftop.
At times. Let me speak to, I guess, MERV 13 filter a little bit. So the MERV 13 filter should not have any effect on the ductwork itself.
Okay.
It's going to have more effect on the piece of equipment itself, right? Because
Okay.
it's going to have, the pressure that you're talking about is really more in the air handler itself. So it's going to almost make the fan work harder, right?
Okay.
Potentially. So
Yep.
you need a bigger fan in order to pull through a filter that's doing more work.
Right.
I guess that's the easiest way of kind of putting it in common terms, I guess, that we can all kind of get behind, right?
Right, okay. So we're not anticipating any sort of physical ductwork that would need to be replaced. We wouldn't have to rip down ceilings and I mean,
The other, and some of those other additional items, same type of thing with the cooling, was if we're in the system, and Joe kind of went through and identified, okay, well, that's an old pneumatic system, the VAVs, right? So not necessarily the ductwork getting replaced, but the VAVs and the controls. It's the old style where stuff they put in now is you put a setting and then it provides feedback to say, okay, yes, it's actually giving you what you're asking for.
Right.
So we strategically went through on that list down below and said, okay, that school makes sense to replace the control system and the VAVs because they're obsolete. So not ductwork per se, but the controls
Okay.
and the VAVs in some of those systems.
okay. So are the new rooftops that we put in with our referendum, they would be able to handle,
So funny.
and even this one out here, this one is not, I mean, obviously we're not going to do this building, but this rooftop unit that we have sitting out here, that's not on the top of a roof, but it's a rooftop unit.
Speak that unit at all, but I
Right.
can speak, I've worked on the referendum work as well,
Okay.
from a commissioning standpoint of the equipment. And all of the equipment that was put in as part of the referendum work is already MERV 13.
It is, okay.
That's how it was designed, that's how it was
Excellent.
engineered, that's kind of
Okay.
a more of today's standard.
Okay.
Is MERV 13, so
Okay.
that's how it was all done.
Excellent, okay.
That's one other point I forgot to mention. For people who might be thinking, well, why haven't you been working on this? The referendum, and I didn't go back to the Siemens study, so I can't speak to what was done there, but I know there was probably HVAC improvements as part of that, maybe.
Yeah, there was.
But we spent about $11 million on HVAC improvements, primarily at the middle schools and at South, but even the elementaries, and a lot of that I think was swapping out or getting at least the offices air conditioned for summer school and the health room and all of that. So we've made, $11 million is a lot of money in any conversation. So we've done a lot of work so far. We just happen to have a lot of sites, so I don't want people thinking we've been, completely asleep at the switch, working through this, so.
So the other question I have is I'm assuming we have makeup air at our kitchens so as we pull that makeup air through the building, that air that we're pulling through the building, and that's not going to go through the filters, right? So you know what I'm saying?
The outside air that's coming in from.
Yes.
So so makeup air for our kitchen is typically just to make up for the exhaust that is exhausted
Right.
through the kitchen itself.
Right. So,
And
yeah.
the filtration that's done on that it's not up to MERV 13 because it's
Okay.
really just it's bringing in fully outside air.
Okay.
So it's catching just debris for
Just
the
debris,
most part. Yep.
Any other question? Yes, Mr. Coleman.
So, as we take a look at this, you had mentioned this could potentially be funded in part or in whole by the Esser funds. When do we anticipate to have a discussion on where we stand with Esser funds, and when might we be determining if this could potentially be a good spend in that area, or using those funds or not?
Yeah, we have two board workshops scheduled in October, the 4th and 26th, I believe, where we'll be focusing primarily on budgets topics. So we'll have those two meetings. We'll have our normal cycle of meetings in October. And then November will come and maybe a decision. Again, we can make this decision as quick as the board wants to, but to give it, I think, a fair airing with everything else going on, November. having some sort of plan or package put together. And we don't have to approve all this in one. You might say, well, Darren, we don't know what's going to happen 2 years ago or 2 years from now in the state budget. What does $3.5 million get us? But then you're picking and choosing. And that's why I'm glad we came up with a prioritized list for the board, because this is our recommendation from a lot of different sets of eyes. But November, I'd like to get going on the duct cleaning and those things. It can be done now. We can do it not impact the instructional days, how we bid it out. I would like to get going with those types of things. November on the other things, so we can get going with design work on the work that we might want to do next summer. That's the timeline I have pictured in my head. Again, it's the board's call. I mean, it's a big decision. Sitting next to other big decisions.
But understanding the Esser funds, all the regulations that come with the Esser funds, so on and so forth, it's going to take us a bit to get through some of that and understand that and put that in perspective for our board. So
I think so.
yeah. Okay.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate all the hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brady, back to our action items. First action item is approval of the minutes from the August 9th, 2021 F&F meeting. I'll be looking for a motion.
So moved.
Mr. Montijo, is there a second? Mr. Deeds seconds. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. Our second action item is approval of vouchers. Sure, looks like we have some questions.
Yes, we had 2 questions this
Excellent.
month. On voucher number 342774, payment to CISA 5 for $34,923.90. The question was, do we have a support agreement for IC, or do we pay by the incident? And IC, for those that don't know, is Infinite Campus. It's our student information system. And Infinite Campus outsources their support to CISA 5. So we pay an annual support fee for that support, and it covers all needed support for the year. And this payment was for our 21-22 support year.
So that was for the whole year. It was broken into a couple different components, though, it looked like.
Some of it, because of a component of Infinite Campus, is for food service. We break out a part of it to pay for it out of Fund 50 because it's an allowable expense. And within Fund 50, we have to figure a percentage between the breakfast program and the lunch program. And then there was an administrative piece that gets paid for out of a smaller bucket. But,
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Appreciate that.
So, sure, by support, do they mean technical support, training, if we need to be trained on a new feature?
all of the above.
All of the above,
Now,
okay.
training may be an additional cost depending on what it is.
Okay.
But like right now, we've just added a campus pay feature to it, and there was not that, we were able to get support without having to pay an additional fee for
okay.
that support. Okay, second voucher question was for 342948, a payment to niche.com for $9,990. And the basic question is, what is this for? And it's an annual fee for premier listing on this website. The website is used by families to compare schools. It has different categories of K through 12, college, and then grad school. And this is mainly for eAchieve to be out there, and they pay to have eAchieve come up first and foremost. They provide analytics at the end of each month. I attached a report that for August that shows how many hits were on their site in August, and we've done this for, I believe this is our 5th year with them now. When I look back, it was 4 to 5 years that we've been with them. In addition to this, they also have in spring or February, right when the open enrollment starts, they have another campaign push that's an optional feature that we pay for with this company.
Sure, does this come out of the eAchieve's advertising budget?
Yes, it does.
Any other questions? There questions about the vouchers in general? All right, I'll be looking for a motion for approval of the vouchers.
So moved.
Is there a second? I will second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None, 5-0. Thank you. Moving on to action item number 3, approval of stormwater maintenance agreement.
This is tied to our improvements at Butler Middle School. The city's asking for us to approve this agreement. I'm not an expert in stormwater, but it's basically tying our hands to maintaining the infrastructure of the retention ponds for the foreseeable future. So the purpose of their design continues to be worked in perpetuity. We would be in charge of maintaining that. So this agreement's coming forward just to do that. The board, I have it on the board agenda as well. I thought this was more of a board topic than of F&F topic. So, this document is complete. There's one legal description that just needs to be added that would be ready for Wednesday. But I put the key, what I consider to be the key paragraph in the executive summary, which outlines outlines the agreement in general. But this was all part of the original design of what was installed over the last year at Butler Middle School.
There was just one.
I think there's one, but it's long.
Yeah, a real skinny one at the,
Runs along
The
the
south-
south
yeah.
border, along the funeral home, kind of, not quite, but.
Darren, have we had past agreements like this with the city?
Not that I've been involved with, but
I don't recall these either.
actually in my previous district, I never remembered this type of agreement being.
And then I guess what's driving it is just the build that we had done, and it requires the retention of the water.
Yeah, we had a lot of asphalt, hard surfaces, so that's what kind of drove the design.
Oh, that went up. Oh, yeah.
The whole,
Gotcha.
the cut all the way across.
Okay. And have our attorneys reviewed this?
Yes.
And it came back with no other?
Yeah, it was clean.
Came back clean?
Yep.
Okay. I move approval of the stormwater maintenance agreement as presented.
Karen?
Sorry, is there any sort of, I
Not that
didn't
I'm
see
aware of.
anything, right, okay, that's
Just
what I
need
thought.
something in writing that we,
That we agree to maintain it, okay, excellent. Yes,
Sorry. Are you asking if we're not complying with it, what happens?
Right, what happens?
I think it's section 5.
Is it
says-
section 5?
Yeah.
yeah.
Looks pretty standard, though.
Yeah, it doesn't really,
Like if you don't cut your grass, they're going to do it and pay you.
they're gonna
or bill
fix
you.
it for you, yeah, I was gonna say, okay. Excellent. Alrighty.
And
I thought you meant like a dollar threshold.
And
Yeah,
I
I
would
thought,
assume-
is anything punitive?
I would assume there'd be dialogue too. The city would be saying, hey, you guys call us up.
Right.
Could you pay attention to this, whatever X, Y, and Z is? And yeah, okay.
Easy to envision the lack of maintaining these leading to a document like this.
Right, no, yeah,
Over
that's, yeah,
time,
right, exactly.
They kind of mowed under or whatever, and
Seems reasonable. Yeah.
So did our engineers tell us how big that pond had to be, or was it the city? Or
yeah,
the DNR?
Kapoor's did the design work on it.
Okay.
And the math on it, so that's who I got this final version from
Okay.
today. And they'll also be providing the legal description as well.
And the reason I ask that is, so say it's not big enough, because in some areas of the city, there are certain businesses that are buying up houses. Yes, because they created a problem. In fact, right down the street, I think 5 houses were bought by the city because they didn't increase the size of the storm sewer down in the river. What does that look like if this doesn't work and we have a bunch of flooded basements because we've been? What does that look like for us? I know what it looks like for the city because they had to buy 5 houses.
Don't know the answer to
I
that.
don't,
one.
okay.
I mean, we have-
Get a big hole and
it's all about
dig
asking
deeper.
questions
We
for
have-
me now,
We have green space.
right? Yeah, I know.
It'd be part of the solution, would be my guess. But
Okay, all right. I'm just
hopefully we
worried
don't have
about.
to go there.
I'm just worried about the district having to buy 5 houses and a funeral home.
Yeah.
And I don't think our insurance is going to cover us. I have a sneaking suspicion. So I was just wondering what that looks like. If you could maybe find out if we're on the hook, if it's not big enough, or who's on the hook.
So do you want to wait on the motion then? To have that
What
piece
is
of
the time limit?
information?
What do we have to have it signed by?
Darren,
We set up line of credits with
Yes.
Waukesha State Bank with all this. If we get this approved, they'll release the line of credit. That's the biggest
Oh,
push on
yeah,
this.
I gotcha.
Is that a big enough issue to have you make a decision you're not comfortable with? Unless you want to have me bring it to the board and get an answer to that question, and we bring it to the Wednesday, and if I don't have an answer, the board could just choose not to act, but that's
Yeah, I'd kind of like
Well,
to have an answer
I-
because
I-
it's a big deal in Waukesha. I mean,
and it might take some time to get that answer.
yeah, and I don't know if I'd have something by Wednesday, in all honesty.
what is your thought about the problem with releasing the funds? I mean, we don't know. The people sitting around this table have no idea if that's an issue or not.
As I said, it's not a big enough thing in my mind to have you to make a decision you're not comfortable with. So I think you do whatever you want to clarify whatever questions you have.
Well, I would be happy to retract the motion, and it would have to be also agreed upon by Ms. Reinacek if you'd like to get this
I think it's
answer,
important
so-
because I know that the city has paid a lot of money on engineering and houses and digging big ponds. And I know a couple other businesses that have done the same in Waukesha because if you get a flooded basement, that business is liable.
So I will retract the motion.
I will as well.
Excellent, thank you. Alrighty, so I guess let's find out who.
If it's time sensitive, we do have that board workshop scheduled for the 4th of October.
For sure, yes.
Maybe we have a
Yeah, we could.
minute board meeting or
Right.
5-minute, whatever you need.
We could do that. Yep. I just want to make sure that our bases are covered with the liability, for sure. Alrighty, thank you on that one. Our last action item of the evening is the approval of the String Academy contract.
Yeah, this agreement comes to the F&F committee every year for you to reconsider, and this goes back to 2014-15. Not any recommendations in terms of changing it. The dollar amounts that we pay per student are held constant. There's a cap financially for the district at $31,000. And there's some history here in terms of, because when we talked about this last time, the board or the committee, I can't remember which, asked for some, participation numbers. What's it been? What schools are the kids coming from? So Sherry has a summary now that it's attached as well for you to look at the history of it. So we see no reason to not seek approval for this. There was some concerns that if it gets so small, at what point do you not do it? But
Mr. Como?
Even when it was a larger number of total students, the cost per student was roughly the same. So, that has remained steady. So that was one of the things that I was looking at as, part of the data here this evening.
All right, looking for a motion.
I'll move to approve the String Academy contract as presented.
Excellent. Is there a second? Mr. Dietz seconds. Any further discussion, questions? Mr. Como?
Just real quick, with last year being the odd year it was, obviously, my hopes is maybe there could be a rebound in some of the numbers. And I thought we at least need to give it a year to see what happens. Does the trend continue to go down, or is there a bounce back? Just see what that's like. Because I don't think we've last year's just an anomaly, so I would toss it out. Is I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, definitely. Agreed. Alrighty.
And this doesn't
Yep.
come to the board, I don't believe. This is
This is
this
just the
committee has the
committee.
authority to approve these
Contracts.
kind of lease agreements or
Yes.
whatever you want to call them.
Right.
Alrighty. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. Thank you. Alrighty. Now we are on to the remainder of our discussion information items. The second one up this evening is the monthly budget report. Take it away, Sherry.
Thank you. Well, we're at that time of year where it's not a ton of spending going on right now for our general fund and special education. But I wanted to just point out on the revenue side, I thought it was really interesting that both of our student fees and our textbook fees, the collections have surpassed where we were at this point last year and actually going back for several years, which don't exactly know why. I have some guesses. Perhaps families are feeling more stable now after financially stable as COVID's, things are settling down and jobs are becoming more available. Could be the stimulus money that people have gotten that have allowed them to catch up. It also could be that we're a little bit low. We were at our budget last year, but our budget was low last year for collections because we anticipated people not necessarily being able to pay last year. So there could be some catch-up involved in that, but the trend is very positive and actually a really good thing. That was really about it on the revenue side. We don't really have much coming in at this time of the year for our revenues. On the expense side of things, our salaries and benefits just reflect our summer pays with the staff that are 12 months. So next month we'll start having our full salaries and being able to start tracking a better projection on where we're at. Purchase services, really our top three areas of spending were personal services, advertising, and technology. Most of it was just a lot of smaller purchases, nothing really big. Technology was mainly our annual software renewals, so very typical for this time of year to have that spending. Non-capital objects is always this time of year. We have our general supplies, as everybody was getting ready in August to go back, get ready for school and getting their classrooms all set up. There was a rather large non-capital technology purchase in the non-caps, and it's for interactive smart boards for schools. Technology was able to get a good price on them, and actually they're smart TVs, not smart boards, excuse me. The smart TVs, they were able to get a good price on them, and so they originally, most schools wanted them out of last year's budget, but they didn't come in till this month, so we carried over their budgets for them to enable them to still get them. So a real nice improvement, especially at the elementary level, for a lot of the technology that is going to be going in because of those purchases. There was a large credit under capital objects, and that was for payment for selling our technology to Secondhand Max. Other than that, there really wasn't too much more in expenditures, and that we would, nothing out of the ordinary. Too early to start comparing, but we're really close to where we normally are at this time of year. Fund 27, from a revenue perspective, we really don't start seeing any revenue in Fund 27 until November. That's when our categorical aid starts coming in and our grant payments start coming in as we start making claims. Expenditure-wise, really just salaries at this point, and again, just the summer salaries. So nothing big to report in Fund 27. In Fund 43, as we're starting to wind down our projects, it's mainly the payment to the contractors that have done the work through today, when I ran the report, we've spent all but about $3.8 million worth of our referendum money. So those projects are wrapping up and are getting paid, and soon this will be off the report altogether when all those payments have been made. One of the interesting things I'd like to talk about is the, are there questions on this part? Otherwise, I'd like to move to the health claims payable.
Any questions? No? Oh, Mr. Dietz.
Sherry, do you have information on summer school? Like how many kids participated this year compared to
I
last
can
year?
get that for a Friday update for Darren, but we haven't run our summer school report yet. We haven't filed our summer school report yet, so, yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
It's due pretty soon, so we'll have all that information
We'll be
available.
finalizing the budget soon, so.
Right.
So it'll be part of that.
Let me just make a note of that. So, to direct your attention to the health claims payable spreadsheet, all along we've been saying, we're getting a nice surplus, we've got to do something with it, but being worried that the floodgates were going to open, we've kind of held off. Well, the floodgates have opened. This summer, apparently everybody was comfortable going back to the doctor because our claims experience is quite hefty. In August, we had the highest claims we've had, I want to say, in 4 years, when we had a really horrific year. But we've got the money to back it up this year. So we're still in a really good position, but we're not going to be moving anything right now. We're recommending moving anything right now because we think it's going to be used up as the claims are starting to come through. So it's good that we're in this position, that we have such a surplus to handle this, and that we were able to continue to roll that money over through the pandemic. Any questions on that? That's separate from our overall fund balance, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which is also a surplus. This was just our day-to-day operating surplus in there.
I mean, just basically, if you've been watching month to month, you understand this, but if you haven't been watching month to month, basically people delayed having various procedures done, even sometimes normal, regular testing that, would occur. And I saw even with people in my own family, the amount of times visiting the doctors went way down. And that was just due to, the environment we were in. And healthcare organizations even slowed down to a great degree at one point, started back up. So I'm surprised it took this long to get a rebound. I was really wondering, during the summer, really? I would think we would have seen the rebound sooner. But now I guess people are feeling a little bit more comfortable, and that's happening. And we do need people to get back into, being as healthy as they can. So
it's not a doom and gloom. It's it's where we expect it at some point for this to start, and it's started. But right now, there's still plenty of funds in there that I don't expect that it's going to be an issue.
Bless you.
bless you.
And dental's in good shape too, and we're starting to see a little bit of a spike in claims for dental, but not much. It seems like the dental world opened up a little bit earlier than the rest of the medical world, and people have been taking care of their dental needs, so our fund is in good shape there too. No tax report because obviously we don't have any tax levy yet, so as soon as we have our new tax levy set in October, we will create the new tax levy report that we'll report on monthly. But all of our taxes from last year are collected as of August. Everything's been collected, but it had been booked as a receivable for last year, so it doesn't show up in the budget numbers at all. But it has all been collected. Questions on any of it? And that wraps up my report.
Excellent. Thanks, Sherry. Pretty. Next up is federal COVID relief funding.
Okay.
There we go.
So, what we wanted to do was talk a little bit about where we're at with funding. additional funding that we've gotten through COVID. And so first I'm going to have you look at, there's a summary of Esser funding spreadsheet. And the main goal is to talk through the Esser funding. But then there's a few additional things at the bottom that we'll get to. There's, at this point, 3 Esser funds. We haven't heard anything about more. But Esser 1, Esser 2, and Esser 3. On here it compares all of the different things, what bills that came through, whether there's equitable participation required, which basically meant we had to share a portion of our funding with private schools. That was the case with Esser 1, Esser 2, and Esser 3. We do not have that component because they pulled money out and are having the private schools manage their own funding on those in the other bills. As far as status right now, Esser 1, we have spent all of the district's Esser 1 money, and we're just working on the final claim. We have some wording in the grant that they want us to update, and then the final claim will go through. There's just a small amount of private school funding that hasn't been spent yet, but they have another year to spend it, so that'll be carried over for the private schools. But we had an allocation, a total allocation of $1.2 million. Of that, about $60,000 was for private schools. So we have essentially spent a little over $1.1 million on Esser 1. A lot of different things it was spent on. It was spent on cleaning supplies, plexiglass, a lot of plexiglass to build all of our partitions. It was spent on staffing in cases where we needed to expand because of the dual models of virtual learning and eAchieve's spike in attendance last year. So we had extra eAchieve teachers. We had extra 4K because there was a big surge in our 4K program. So those were the main types of things. We didn't really use it for any food service or special education needs that we had. Everything was taken care of. We paid for the bus cleaning out of there, that extra, that tab, was it some sort of tablet or something? I can't remember what it was, but it was a monthly
Zinc.
Special cleaning that we did.
Zinc. Yep.
Yes, I know. I can't, I've looked at it enough, I should remember it, but.
Talked about it enough, I should remember it.
Right. So Esser 1 will be put to bed pretty soon from a district perspective. Esser 2, our allocation as it stands right now is $4,795,366. There's still that additional part, that's additional funding that's to be determined, and that is being based on your hours of, there's certain schools that get it because they didn't meet a minimal funding. When the formula came out, we didn't make the cut for the amount per school. That was a minimum, or amount per student, minimum. So this extra pot is there for all schools that didn't reach that minimum, but rather than use it to bring everybody up to the minimum, it's being based on the hours of instruction. And we had a lot of instruction last year, I think more than most schools did.
Face-to-face instruction.
Face-to-face, thank you, I'm sorry. Yes, face-to-face instruction, important designation. And we filed our report. Now we're just waiting for DPI to come up with the calculation of who gets what. But we are expecting another addition to that funding. There's a total, there's a total of $65 million that's still sitting out there waiting to be reallocated to the schools that qualified for it. And, oh my goodness, my Apple skills are showing right now, sorry. Oh, here we go. Esser 3, so for Esser 2, where we're at with Esser 2 is we're just starting to get into the budgeting and looking at how we're going to spend it. A lot of that's going to come into the workshops that Darren had already alluded to, because it is a big chunk of money and we need to have a good plan in the district and how it's going to be used. Of course, we're still going to use it for cleaning and extra things that are being done. But there's a bigger picture here in how we need to spend all that money. Because Esser 3 is over $10 million. It's $10,769,710. So all told, we're going to get a minimum of $16,770,960 plus the additional funding for Esser 2. It's a rather large amount of money, and we really need to be strategic in how we're going to utilize that money. As Darren talked about, the HVAC this is a very allowable expense in Esser, is to use it for HVAC things. And so we'll have those workshops. We'll figure it out. The grant isn't even open yet for Esser 3. We just know our funding amount, but these workshops will help get us ready. As part of the Esser 3, you have to do more community engagement, and so you have to reach out to students, families, basically anyone in the community to get input on how they feel we should be using this funding. And so we have to come up with a plan for that and how we're going to achieve that particular part. The other part of ESSER 3 is 20% does have to be allocated to address learning loss. So I have, let's see. Thank you. $2.1 million out of our budget is needs to be used for that, for ESSER 3. ESSER 3, we have a spending period through September 30th of 2024. ESSER 2, we have through September 30th of 2023. There has never been like a maintenance of effort or maintenance of what's called equity in the first two grants, but the third grant, for ESSER 3, there is something called a maintenance of equity, and basically says that in your lower free and reduced percentage schools, or your higher free and reduced percentage schools, so your higher poverty level schools, you can't reduce the local spending to what it was in the prior, let me just double check that. I have to look at the exact wording of it. I believe it was like pre-pandemic spending. So you can't take these dollars and then not still contribute to your local dollars in those schools. So it's really important that we watch what our spending is in our higher poverty schools and that we're not taking away local dollars and using the ESSER 3 funds to cover that. I mean, the ESSER funds are pretty wide open for the most part. There's a lot that can be done with it. And there are areas where you can use it to help with budget shortfall, but we just have to be very strategic about how we do that. Do you have comments on Esser?
Just one thing, and Sherry didn't mention, but I find it to be helpful. The real names of the Esser, the bills, we put in there as well. We call them Esser 1, 2, and 3. I think most people call them that, but if you hear about these other plans that are out there besides Esser 1, 2, and 3, they're probably the same exact thing. So I find that to be a good reminder because I could never ever remember the names myself. So the other thing, there's one other, and I don't know if it's in all the ESSERs, but projects and how we're going to go about prevailing wage is part of this is because it's federally funded projects. So just a point of reference,
Right.
Not saying that's a critical thing, but it's different than if we were to, like our referendum work we've done. So
I did add an attachment. I don't think we need to go through it tonight, but there's another attachment that has just kind of a comparison of what you can spend these dollars on. But they're pretty broad categories. But I think when we get into the workshops, it's good information to have, and we can use that as a starting point once we start determining what we're going to use it for. If you'd like me to go through it, I'm happy to go through it, but they're pretty generic categories. And
then at the bottom of the ESSER summary, there's kind of the others.
just going to get into those.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So additional pandemic funding, FEMA, we're still waiting for FEMA.
We haven't been told no.
We haven't. We're like one of the few districts that haven't been told no, and even our auditor said that they don't have anybody that's gotten this far. And they have looked at it because they did come back and say, there's some things in here that we know you're not going to approve. Your opportunity is to cut them out right now or let us decline it, and then you have to come back and fight. And we opted to cut it out right away because if they're telling us they're not going to approve it, then we can get our funding sooner in the FEMA years. I don't know what that means, but so we did bring it down, and now we're looking at closer to about $600,000 if approved. So still a substantial chunk of money. As a reminder, I did not budget that anywhere in this year's budget. It will be a bonus if we get it this year, or when we get it. Same thing with the unemployment compensation refund. the latest information that came out was, yes, it's coming, it'll be coming later this year, but no details on when it will be.
Or how.
Or how. They keep saying refunds, but boy, it would take us a very long time to use up $900,000 in unemployment
None
refunds.
of us would probably be at this table by the time the last three.
No, I would expect to probably be dead by then, so.
Mr. Como?
So this is the first time we've ever dealt with FEMA, correct?
Correct.
And are we dealing directly with FEMA, or is this going through the state at some?
No, it's directly with FEMA. Mhm.
Okay.
They had a portal that we worked through to file the claim, so it is
Okay.
directly with FEMA.
Okay.
I'm guessing they're pretty overwhelmed and they aren't used to dealing with school-type things, so.
Sure.
There was a lot of quick no's out there to neighboring business managers I've talked to, at least in the county. And we're still
So why are we still in the running?
I think we were
shrewd
fairly-
fiscal management would be my
Yes,
first.
exactly.
Wow.
No, I do think,
I don't know.
Do you know what they're looking at? I guess I
No.
don't understand the parameters.
No, because
Well-
we talked about what we were claiming, and
I think that's a big part of it because we went into it looking at what really is allowable versus just throwing everything in the pot. We really tried to determine what are they most likely going to allow, and we went at that. So even though we're a larger district, our claim was smaller than some of the local districts that were a lot smaller because they just threw everything in the pot. And I think FEMA just went check no because that's my speculation.
the district's a third our size, we probably claimed 5 or 10 times what we claimed.
Wow.
But got
But no one
shot
knew,
down
in
right
their
away.
defense,
Yes.
no one knew.
Right.
This is first
None
time
of us
for
had worked with
everybody.
FEMA,
Sure.
so I'm not pointing the finger at them at all. We all took different approaches, and I think that helped us. But there's not a lot of correspondence. It's not like we're talking to FEMA every day. It's kind of like the IRS. Every 3-4 weeks, you get a memo from them or something. It's random and on their timeline.
And it could still all be declined in the end, but the fact that we've been through a first round and it made approval through the first round when other districts never made it through the first round is interesting.
We're not trying to take advantage of any. We're just trying to be
gosh, no.
realistic. Read what this is all about, and try to submit realistic information, and not expand it, not exaggerate it, not Fair enough.
Okay, the other thing, we've been getting FICA tax rebates for the people that we had to provide paid time off for COVID. There was a period that's over now, but we're still getting our tax rebates. We've already gotten $35,000 today, and we should be getting another $20,000, and then that'll wrap that up. Then this one cracks me up because we received a letter pretty much the day after the last board meeting that we're getting money from the National School Lunch Program for having to potential revenue loss from back in March when everything got shut down with the pandemic, and we're getting $117,000 to go to our food service fund with the same stipulation of the rest of our food service fund and how we can spend it. So, it's always nice to get extra money, but it's interesting that a year and a half later we get this information that we're getting money all of a sudden, nothing we'd ever heard of before. So, called the Emergency Operational Cost Reimbursement.
We never claimed anything, though.
No, we didn't know it existed.
Yeah. So we tried to shrink Esser down or all the COVID response into one page. And Sherry has a good Q&A attachment as well in preparation for our workshops that are coming up. You have the numbers in mind. You can do a little research yourself on timelines and what can be spent and all of that. But I thought it was I thought Sherry did a nice job of summarizing everything.
Sure, we're making wise choices with some very nice funding that we're getting. Any questions on the COVID relief funding?
Excellent. Thank you, Sherry. Our next discussion information item is food service program update.
Yeah, we, in Jess's called in, and she handles most of the free and reduced and food service processing for student applications and all that. But we just wanted to come back with just a couple of pieces of baseline information. We've actually been getting, and Sherry's tracking input we're getting on ideas people have in terms of applications and donations and all that. And so I thought I'd start with baseline information, and there's a application process chart that Jess put together. It's pretty self-explanatory, so I don't, unless you want me to read it to you. I just thought it was a good visual to let you know the different ways that people can apply and things like that. And then the other attachment is the actual free and reduced application. We've talked a lot about that, so I thought we might as well share the actual document and the thresholds. And this is a federal program. We're just the implementers or the facilitators of it. We're not guiding it in any way. And then lastly, we have been knocking around this idea. Oh, let me share my screen again. About how we could, seek donations. 'Cause, we're a pretty charitable community, I think. So we've been toying with this. This is just a small little version of it, and how to make it simple and easy for families. Anyone who pays a food service fee or signs in to make a payment to us. This is just higher and north. We just grabbed 2 schools, but it could be all the schools or the schools just tied to your household, where you would click on the school, donations, higher lunch money, and then you just key in the dollar amount. We're going to give them the option of what school they want to do it to. We think that would help kind of, focus the dollars, because a lot of times people have money in mind for a particular family or whatever. And then a comment section, whether it's, I want this to be anonymous or whatever. So I think functionally it's there. I think the one thing that Jess and I were talking today is, okay, how do we go about dispersing? What's the criteria? Is it the highest balances? Is it, it's one thing to gather the money, but we don't have that answer tonight because we were just kind of brainstorming today. A lot of times we refer to the guidance counselors at the schools and say, do you have families in mind? That needs a little wordsmithing, but I also need at some point, for everyone to say, yeah, Darren, we want to go ahead and pursue this approach or not, or what do we want to do now that we've had some time to think about it. We talked about it a lot in late August, so. But I thought it was a good start. Jess put the school store together pretty quickly. I think it's a viable system for us if we want to go down that path. And there's other things, but I thought this was one I'd share since we got some legs underneath it. Shared it with you tonight.
Como?
So is the thought to have this money be centralized or decentralized at each location?
Yeah, we've kind of gone both ways. Originally, we were thinking give people the option to give to their school or district-wide. I don't know if that's possible. Jess, is that I don't know if that's still... Can you hear me? Okay. I think we have probably a workaround if we want to.
So do these accounts exist at each school? Would we have to set those up? What does that look like? So let me ask the question a different way. Where does the money go?
We would be looking at it going. Okay, we would set up a Fund 21 account for each school, specifically for food service donations, and then on their monthly reports, they'd see how much money they gathered through this. It would show up on their reports. The thought originally, part of the thought we've had is the schools know the families in need the best. They really do. They know their families, and so to put that power into the schools to make decisions with the money is a good thing, but also to have that district funding available if some of the schools didn't get as many donations as others, that we would have some sort of a process where they would basically apply or request funding from the district funds. But we would put it all in Fund 21, which is the donations and special projects account.
And we really, this is just proof of concept kind of thing. Just functionally, can we make it work? We really haven't gotten into the, like I mentioned, how are we going to divvy out the money? What's the criteria? You know, the criteria I'd like us all to agree on, so there's not questions at a later date. But the functionality is there. There is more work to be done on it, for sure.
All right, any other questions on that? Mr. Montiel.
Hey, I was just going to say thank you for doing this. I know we all appreciate it. This was a big discussion at the last board meeting, and to get this done that quickly, and I know you're compiling ideas that people came in too, so that was great. Thank you.
And for those people who have sent something in, we are finally going to get back. We had to get school up and running too, so there's a slight delay. So we apologize for that.
Yeah,
But
we got some good ideas.
Any other questions? So where are we on collecting the applications, Darren?
Jess, you want to touch? We've been in contact with the schools and asked them to be pushing that, but that was pre our meeting. I just said that was pre our last board meeting, just so they know we were on it.
Nearly the number of applications that we normally get.
So we're down?
Yes, we are now down the 1st of September.
Okay, so how are we trying to recapture those? What's the plan?
Yeah, that's.
Right.
Go ahead, Jess.
So right now, when a family asks for a fee waiver,
Hmm?
our fee waiver does ask if you qualify for free or reduced lunch. If the family says, yes, I do qualify, but we don't actually have a status, so we're then sending out an application and asking them to apply. It does help them because if they qualify, we do offer a higher percentage off.
Okay, so,
And there's other ideas on that spreadsheet that we just haven't had time to
okay,
get to. So,
alrighty.
Add, Darren, there's also another state program funded through, I believe, the USDA called Pandemic Ebt Benefits. We had them last year, and then over the summer, they will continue through 2021-22 school year, and they are dependent on families free and reduced percentage. So I think as more families become aware of that is still available, that might also help increase applications if they haven't already.
So we know, and maybe we don't, but I'm assuming that we do, we know who in the last 18 months that we waived fees for, correct? Are we pursuing those people, or? So what I'm trying to get at is, I don't want to wait for these people to come to us. I think that's a poor strategy. I think that we get that list of people that we reduce. If we don't have that list, that's an issue administratively. But I think we do have that list. And I think we should be reaching out to those people, those families that requested some sort of fee waiver that are not on our list.
Yeah,
And that's time to get on it.
and we've used the best databases we can. We were on this before the last board meeting.
Right.
Going back 2 years and who was on free and reduced, and I think that was the best starting point. Sherry just mentioned one, but we do have a database for people who've asked for waived fees.
Right.
But then I think we get down to the point where it's the schools driving it.
I would
the
agree.
guidance counselors.
Yeah,
and,
I don't disagree.
But so we are on it now, and like I said, now that school's up and running, we're ready to refocus on this. So we'll tackle any idea that comes down the road as long as it's doable.
What gets lost, I think, in this conversation, because I know I have talked to a number of constituents, is why are we concerned about getting the applications in? What does that mean to us? Well, one, we're trying to feed people who need to get fed, but there are other organizations that depend upon that as kind of a gateway criteria for other nonprofit organizations. And we also have other funding that occurs within all schools based upon those numbers. So can you explain a little bit more of that? I mean, we might know what Title I is, well, but does the average person know what Title I is? And if you could maybe give us just a broader, why is it important to capture this data? It goes, and I'm not minimizing making sure that the students who need food get fed. That's the primary goal. But there are other important things that comes with the capture of that data of the people who really need this. So can you explain that a little bit better?
Sure. And several funding sources, socioeconomic scales or ratios, whatever you want to say, are used to determine that. And free and reduced lunch has been a staple and a measure, whether it's reducing athletic fee or things in-house to that, to E-rate and all these other funding sources, and a grant that Sherry just mentioned as well. So, when I thought about that for the first time over the summer as this conversation evolved, it's also my fear at the time was when free and reduced lunch goes away, or when the free lunches goes away, if that ever happens. If this goes on for a couple of years, people get out of the habit of applying for those, and we use it for so many things that I'd hate to lose what I think is the best tracking thing for our socioeconomic status in the district. So
can you explain for so many other things? Explain just a few of those.
In terms of funding, Title I, E-rate.
And Title I is for, I'm trying to broaden
Sure.
it to have
Title I funds go to
the
schools with
audience
lower
understand.
socioeconomic scales to help, I think, embolden the instructional programs at their schools. E-rates, technology reimbursement, and Steve Shlomo would know a lot more about that than I do. Again, another socioeconomic factors involved in that. I think when you compare other school districts, what's been the case for my 20-some years of doing this is when you go to measure a school district, it's what's your free and reduced rate. That's how people determined, I guess, a wealthy district versus a poor district or whatever. So there's a lot of conversations, like I said, all the way down to just waiving fees and things like that. So there's a lot of things that go into that number. Now, maybe there's other things we just have never used because we always kind of had this standard that everyone measured. It was the same thing in every district. So is that broad enough?
Can I add kind of a trickle-down thing? So our original Esser 1 allocation was based on our title allocation. So
Right.
they used the data from title to determine what our Esser funding was. So making sure that those types of things are accurate, because there's trickle down, but also in our schools, we have AGR at Whittier, and AGR is dependent on free and reduced because it's the achievement gap reduction. It's looking at our higher poverty level schools and reducing classroom sizes.
And I think that this is why you're spending time on this, Mr. Chairman, is there's a domino effect if we don't capture this data. We don't even know the total domino effect that it would have on our district.
Yeah, there's probably things that we didn't even name tonight that are out there we can't name off the top of our head. But what I wouldn't want to happen is we've run about 30 to 35% free and reduced rate. If those form, and we've used the free and reduced application as that measure, if we don't collect those, and over time it's going to get harder, 2 years from now, am I going to be sitting here telling you that we're a 15% free and reduced district? According to applications, yes, but according to the lives some of our families are leaving at that time, I don't know if that would be a good measure anymore. My gut tells me it won't be as accurate, but
Yes.
So what impact might that have on our tax levy?
well, most of the funding things we've talked about have come outside the revenue limits, so I'm not sure there's a tax impact.
Okay.
Overall revenue impact, potentially, yeah. That is, it's hard to,
But it has a domino effect that impacts our budgeting process and how we think through
Sure.
solving a variety of issues in this district.
and that's why we'll continue to stay on it.
Yeah, no, for
Because
sure.
I think it's worth the time. I do.
Well, it's 100% worth the time, and we need to ramp up those applications. So the other question I have is, where are we on finding out whether we can jump in and out of the SSO?
That's a question I don't believe we have an answer to.
According to the USDA, it's allowable, but it's dependent on the state to be able to administer it that way. And the state right now is not at a position where they would want us to jump out because of
Yeah,
the
well,
claiming
yeah,
system,
no, I
because of the
agree.
way the claiming systems work.
Yeah, I understand. Wanting us and allowing us are two different things. So,
If
I
we
wanna
asked to jump
know-
out tomorrow, I think the answer would be no.
well,
but
but I want to know that for sure, Sherry.
Now, we'll get you
I
a
don't-
firm answer on
okay.
that.
I think.
But also keep in mind that we had several firm answers from DPI over about a 6
I
month
know we
period,
have.
and
We
they
have
were
a
never
lot.
the same.
Yes,
So-
we've had a lot. That's why the firm answer. I want.
And again, they're scrambling
The
too.
answer has changed over time.
Yeah.
For
It's
some of
changed
them. Yep.
dramatically from when we first made the decision in June. So.
Right. So let's make that call and find out what they're saying now.
Not only the answer, but the rationale.
Yeah. Whatever. Yeah. Whatever rationale they can come up with today.
Well, the most recent answer was no because of the claiming system, but
How recent was that answer?
probably right before the meeting.
We can ask again.
Ask again. Mary, any other questions? All righty. Moving on to our fifth discussion information item, which is fund balance report.
Okay, so every year we come back and, as part of the budget process, and share where our ending fund balance was for the general fund and talk about where we're at with percentages of fund balance. But we wanted to break it down because I think it's really important. As our fund balance grew a little bit this year, it's important for people to understand that that is a breakdown of different components. And so I wanted to share tonight what are the components of a fund balance, and when we look at it, what are we really, what is really available money to spend that isn't already tied to something else. So a couple years back, one of the GASB changes was to really reclassify fund balances excuse me. So I'm going to just give a quick overview. There's something called a non-spendable fund balance. And that's a classification that it's just not tangible cash sitting somewhere in a bank account. And so in our Fund 10, we have two items that fulfill our non-spendable fund balance. One is the inventory that we keep at the service building for all of the supplies that get used throughout the year at our schools. And then there's a component of we have to, for our self-funded insurance, we have to have a deposit down with United Healthcare so that they have a certain amount of money always available to pull claims from. And then on a weekly basis, they replenish that. But they have to have a base minimum in there. And so that makes up our non-spendable fund balance, which is a little over $500,000 total right now. And the next one is restricted fund balance, and that's a classification when there's constraints that are put on the source of the money, usually by, a governmental entity or the board. Most of these are put on by DPI and are restricted in Fund 10. So if you're looking at this document, the first 5 bullets are all Fund 10, everything that makes up our Fund 10 fund balance. And the restricted for health claims. So when we talk about our fund balance in claims, this is our emergency funds, right? If our yearly revenue from what we save for the healthcare premiums isn't enough to cover the claims for the year, this is where we could come to. We don't want to come to that, but we've got this money in there. It's $5.3 million currently.
But we have been there. Where
we have.
Pulled from reserves before.
I think 3 years ago, we had to tap in, and then it took us 2 years to pay it back.
That 1.9 million, I think we tapped into 1 year?
Yes, yes, because it was about 900,000, a little over 900,000 paid back over 2 years. So it's there for those purposes when we have a really bad claim year. That's different from the money I talked about earlier that's sitting in our day-to-day operations of our claims funds. So 2 different buckets of money. This one we don't like to tap into unless it's really an emergency. The next one is common school funds. We get common school funds for the libraries. In years past, we've always said, you got to spend it in this year because we don't want to have the carryover. Well, last year, or 2 years ago with the start of the pandemic, they had a lot of money left because they don't even find their final allocation till April, usually around April. And by March, things were shut down, so they had extra money to spend. We let them carry it over. And then this year, there's just a little bit of carryover, but we're hoping to get back to the point where they're utilizing the funds in the year that they got it and not have that. But that, again, is restricted. It can only be used for common school funds. We couldn't touch it for anything else. Then there's a category called assigned.
Como.
I'm sorry.
Just real quick with those school fund carryovers. I remember way back when we used to have a policy that the site had to spend the money or they'd lose it. And to me, that never made sense. And that's why we moved to this, where we allow for carryover. Because if maybe there, for an example, a school might be trying to raise funds that, might be $100,000 or $200,000, a large amount, let's say, and it's going to take them 3 to 5 years to raise it, they should be allowed to have that goal and raise that over time and then still focus on that. Those numbers might not have been realistic numbers. It was probably more like $30,000 for a big project at an elementary school or whatever. But I really liked us getting away from the spend it or lose it kind of, because then the fiscal, maybe the frugality aspect could be gone, because we have had districts that they have carryovers every year. So anyways, I just wanted to make a comment on where we've been on that and how I think we're in a much better place doing it this way.
I just want to point out that the site carryover is a little bit different than the common school funds, because common school funds is specific to the library by law. We have to allow them to carry it over if they don't spend it. We can encourage them to spend it all we want to, but if they don't spend it, they do get it. there is a provision in the law for that. Our site carryover, which is bundled into the unassigned fund balance component. So
Oh, okay.
I'll get down to that one.
Sorry, I got
But-
that confused.
No, that's
Or
okay.
mixed up.
Yeah, nope, common school funds, yeah, but you're absolutely right.
Thank you for that
We
correction.
do allow the sites to carry over. I just want to make sure it's not, you understand it's not in that bucket. It's a substantially larger amount of
I
money
mixed
than that.
two things together there.
That's
Yep.
okay. That's just a little clarification. So that's what we have for our restricted. Then there's one called committed, and it's pretty much the highest formal action of the board to commit a sum of money to a committed fund balance. Right now, we don't have any, and it has to be a board action. Right now, we don't have anything that's committed. We do have assigned, which is the next one, assigned fund balance for OPEB. And this was, if you remember, a few years back, we got the big OPEB settlement, and the board agreed to take whatever we didn't use to prepay off the debt that we put it aside for future OPEB uses. And so this has been, this $3.6 million has been assigned to be used for future OPEB. So it's out there, it's part of our big chunk of fund balance, but again, it's reserved for something else. And then we have our unassigned fund balance, and that's pretty much everything else. And it's in Fund 10, can be used for any legal purpose for Fund 10. Included in here is any surplus we have over the years. It also includes the carryover from the sites that we do allow. And the sites do appreciate that because they do often have projects that they're like to save for to get things that they wouldn't normally be able to get otherwise. So overall, the fund balance, as you see it up there, is, I'm sorry, I can't even read that far, and I didn't bring it up on my pad yet. Thank you. And that's our overall Fund 10. But Darren, if you want to scroll down, could you scroll down just a little bit? So we have a board policy which is attached on the fund balance, and the way the fund balance is calculated is you look at what you have for committed, assigned, and unassigned, the year-end balances of the prior year. So what ended in 2021, and that was the for 43 million. And then you divide that out by the expenditures. What in our budget for the next year do we have for general and special education budgeted expenditures? And this gives you the percentage that we require in the board policy. And right now we're at 23, almost 24%. And I believe the board policy had us at minimum of 15%, I believe. So we've got a healthy fund balance. I just want to make sure people realize that the overall percentage that is used to calculate that for board policy is far lower than when you look at our total Fund 10 fund balance because of the items that are restricted get pulled out of there. Questions on that?
Como.
So I remember when this policy, 6235, was first put together. We had very little in our rainy day fund, like almost nothing. I think it was a little above zero.
313,000. I don't know why I remember that number, but
It was very small dollar amount for the district our size, and this took many years of good, hard work, good budgeting work, good fiscal management on many people's parts, not just the board putting the policy together to force us to do this, but our administrators, our principals, our teachers. It took many, many years to get to this fiscally sound point that we're at. And I am so glad that we are talking about this dollar amount. It was very uncomfortable knowing that you had, back then, if we had an issue, I think we could operate our district for maybe a couple days, maybe a week. It wasn't very long. So that rainy day fund didn't go very far. It was actually a pretty scary place to be. So there's a lot of people to thank for getting us to this point. And this also saves us money in other ways. So when we went to referendum, our bond score rating allowed us to borrow at a much lower interest rate. So it does save real money. We also got rid of the days when we would make a short-term borrow just to have enough cash flow to get us through the year. And I remember one year we paid almost, I think it was $900,000 in interest for a short-term borrow just to operate for the year. That's a lot of interest. That interest amount, that's a big dollar amount. That's a lot of teachers that were laid off, or a program that was cut, or several programs that were cut back in that day. So I'm really glad that we're talking about these numbers.
I think when people look at our revenue, when you look at our budget, it seems like a large amount, but school revenue is really ebbs and flows throughout the year. It's not like we get our equalization aid on September 1st, and there you have it for the rest of the year. It comes in payments throughout the year. All of our categorical aid is. So the importance of having this money is exactly what you said, to not have to short-term borrow, because you've got the money there to be able to.
And just to give you an idea of the size of that short-term borrow, it was $26 million, $27 million, $28 million we would have to borrow for 1 year and pay the interest on that. That was pretty steep.
27 million on a much smaller budget at the time.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Because inflation's grown.
Yes.
Because that was 20 years ago or whatever. But one other thing, just on the Fund 10 part, this is a healthy fund balance, and we're in a great position, but fund balance is an accounting equation. It's assets minus liabilities. It's not cash necessarily. It's receivables. It's all these things on a specific day. But we don't book the liability for 60-year-old HVAC systems. We don't book for old roofs. We don't book. So the liability, I'm not saying, I guess I'm paid not to protect fund balance, but we have some obligations, and that's why I think our conversation's coming up in the next month or two. We'll try to meld. That's why I like this agenda, the way it laid out. It's melding a lot of the topics that we really need to look at in the weeks ahead as we develop a strategy. And this is, as Mr. Coleman was mentioning, this is a much better position to be working from than 313,000 or whatever that number was back in the day. So.
And then just the lower part of the chart is all of our other funds. So, we have many other funds, 21 special projects, 38 was debt service for energy efficiency, which we've paid that off. So we have a small amount left in the fund balance there that we can probably transfer over to Fund 39 debt. I just need to find the correct logistics to do that. But Fund 39 is a referendum debt. Fund 41 is our capital projects that we levy for every year. Just wanted to point out there, it looks like a large fund balance, but part of that is timing of projects ending in a fiscal year because of when we're doing our summer projects and when the billing for that comes in. So it looks like there's more there than at the end of the year than in 2 months. It's substantially down because of that, because of the projects being paid off. Fund 43, that's our referendum projects. You can see we went from having $34 million fund balance down to 3.8 as of June. So a lot of work done there in those projects last year. Fund 46 is our long-term capital funds plan that this fund was started 5 years ago, and we've been building it little by little every year. We've gotten to the point this year where now we can access it and utilize it for anything that's in our long-term capital projects funds. It's a good thing to keep building on, to have for future spending. It can only be used for those projects. Fund 47 was our turf project. We had a negative balance going into it, and by the end of the year, the board approved making a transfer out of Fund 10 to clear that off, so that's done with now. Fund 49 is really our land projects, our selling of land, buying of land, everything goes in and out of this fund. We have a nice healthy balance in there. There's a very small part of the South Pool, and that's mainly because DPI lumps Fund 49 to be kind of a catch-all. And so there's just a very small part, I think about $75,000. That's our pool sinking fund. That's included in that fund. Fund 50 is our food service fund, and try as we might to spend it down, it just keeps growing, but we're in a better position than we were last year with some extra spending.
I hate to bring this fund up, but I'm going to talk about it anyways.
Good.
So the money in those funds are restricted and are what we can spend that on. DPI dictates. Is that correct, or is it the federal government? DPI or the federal government? Or
Both, I think, both. The federal government definitely restricts the food service. So USDA is the one that restricts what we can use the food service for. Some of the capital things are more DPI related.
Can you give us an idea of the kinds of things that it can be spent on? Because I do have constituents that are asking me, why don't we spend that down and
Right.
on these things, and we can't spend them on those things. And I just
Yep.
want to try and give the public an idea of what we can spend those funds on and what we can't.
Certainly, I'm going to start with what we can't spend them on because that's probably a little bit easier. We can't spend it on increasing any square footage in our kitchens. So when we have referendum projects and we do remodels, we cannot spend any of that, even if we were to increase the space or square footage of our kitchens. If we were to build a new school, we couldn't charge any of the kitchen square footage to Fund 50. We cannot use it to pay off bad debt. We cannot use it to augment what they call non-program foods. So program foods are those items that are included in the National School Lunch Program, National Breakfast Program, Summer Food Program, the reimbursable meals. We also have a la carte items. We can't use any of our fund balance to offset by bringing down the a la carte prices or anything like that. They have to be able to be funded by themselves, including taking out any USDA commodities that have been built into there. So like just after we passed the SSO, DPI came back and said, oh, now you have to raise your adult lunch meals to $3.90 from $3.50 because of the reimbursement for the SSO. So that was an unexpected thing for our staff, that they have to pay more. That's governed by DPI because we can't augment with our food service program any adult food. So things like that. We can't pay off bad debt. We can't go, we're going to give you all a holiday and pay for free meals for a week in a normal year or anything like that. What we can use it for, we can use it for any staffing. Obviously, we can use it to pay Airmark their bills. We can use it for staffing, but specifically for food service. So if we have aides in the cafeteria over lunch and they're literally clocked in for the time that they're serving or in the cafeteria, we can use it for that. We can use it for equipment. There's an approved equipment list that we don't need permission for, but if it's something that's not on the approved equipment list, we have to get permission from DPI to spend the money. So this year we have done a lot of replacements at the schools for things that Aramark identified as being old and worn and we need to upgrade. So equipment is one of the bigger things that we can use it for.
So-
We can't, one thing I've heard a lot is we need to do better food. We need to put the money toward improving the food. We are in what's called a fixed meal price per meal contract. So Aramark bids, or any food service company bids at the beginning of our contract, and that's what we can pay for a meal. We can't pay anymore. So we can't go to Aramark at this point and say, hey, we want you to, up the level of quality of your food to this because it's going to cost them more and it's outside of the agreed upon price. What we can do is we're going to RFP this year, meaning we'll have a new 5-year contract, is there's ways you can write your RFP that require a level of food, and there's food industry terms that I'm just getting to learn, so I don't want to talk too much about them because I'm just learning about them. But you can specify in your contract that that's what you want, and everybody has to bid on that level of quality of food. And that's how you can raise the quality of food. But you can't do it until you go to RFP. We have asked DPI to allow us to spend some of this fund balance to provide for, whether we pay for the food, and it is not allowable. So that's one of the big things I keep hearing. Put the money in the food. We can't. You can create a contract that says you're going to pay for components versus a fixed meal price, but that's a pretty dangerous thing to get into, paying for the actual expenditures of everything.
So how does this fund then get built up? What are the primary reasons? Are we being more efficient so we save some money and it goes into there at the end of the year? And since we can't control the prices, we can't control the price of what we charge. And I remember many years where we wanted to charge less so we wouldn't have this fund balance go up. We couldn't because of federal and state regulations. Are those 2 points true?
Yes, they're exactly true. That's how we build a fund balance. On one hand, they're saying you can't charge less than this. Same thing we go through every year an a la carte calculator where we look at what we have to charge for a la carte so that it isn't dipping into fund balance. But you charge more for these things and you make more money on them. So our reimbursements are good compared to what we have for what we're charging families, and yet we've filed waivers every year for as long as I've worked here to say, I think we've only raised it once in that time frame. So we try to be very responsible with our families and not charge them more than we have to, but we're directed by requirements to charge minimums on things.
Yeah. The other thing is our current contract pays earmark $2 for meal, the standard meal.
$2.90 or up to $2.90 something.
Yeah, something like
it
that.
It can go up max of 3% a year.
Like this past year when the feds came out with the new programs, they raised the reimbursement to, I forget the numbers, like $4. Mm-hmm. So per meal, we had a spread there that we had nothing to do on the revenue side with it. We negotiated the contract side of it, so the $2 we locked in, and that goes through the bid process, so I can't say that that's driven by an outside group because we end up choosing the vendor. But that spread, every meal is just like a restaurant, I guess. And then you add a la carte and all these other, and then you have the auto ads on the fees for a student lunch or an adult lunch, but you always stay at that $2 and whatever on the expense side, and that's where over time, you build a surplus.
They're only allowed, Aramark is only allowed to up their rates per contract year by the Consumer Price Index for food away from home, I believe it is, and but a max of 3%, and that's a DPI requirement, not what's in our contract. And so as things get more expensive, they're in a difficult position with a 5-year contract, and so that builds to it. The other thing, and this kind of leads to our free and reduced percentage conversation too, with the breakfast program, there's 2 different pricing levels of reimbursement. One is regular need, one is severe need. And when your school hits a certain percentage of free and reduced, you get reimbursed at the severe need level, which is extremely high compared to the regular breakfast reimbursement. It's what allows us to do like breakfast in the classroom for the higher free and reduced schools and universal free breakfast, because we do get this higher percentage and it's tied to our free and reduced percentage.
But it's complicated. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's amazing.
So, I appreciate that. I really think this is one of those, and I've been on the board a long time. This is there's such a myriad of state and federal regulations that some work together, some don't work together. I think it's kind of one of those examples of good intention, but when it comes down to implementing, there's forces working in different directions. And, I appreciate you taking time to try and explain things. I was hoping we could make it clearer, but, it's very complex. And I I appreciate you taking the time, trying to do the best you can to explain these things. And we have to follow state and federal regulations. We have to. We have no choice in that. So I just thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me that much time to
Definitely.
talk on this.
Unless there's other questions.
Right, any other questions on
Fund
the?
72 and Fund 80 were the last two, and 72 used to be our scholarship funds, but GASB 84 changed what is really a true scholarship versus we have more of an in and an out versus custodial maintenance of a fund. And so we moved all of that to Fund 21. So Fund 72 will disappear from this list and after this year. And then Fund 80 is our community service fund, and then we try to keep that down.
Fund? Yes.
Jerry, what is
Deeds.
that Fund 80 used for?
Right now, there's our 50% of our SROs are paid for out of the Community Service Fund. String Academy, what we talked about earlier in the contract, comes out of Fund 80. Our Library Liaison, there's 4 items. So the Library Liaison, we share with the public library. We pay a part of I think we pay the salary and they pay the benefits, or vice versa. I don't remember off the top.
Went to a hard dollar amount.
Oh,
but
okay.
The old agreement was something like that.
And then the last component is we do have a staff person who is a community liaison as 50% of her job, and she's paid
Out of
for
the
it.
bilingual
Yes.
office.
Those are the only things we have in our Fund 80.
Other questions about the ending fund balances? All righty. Good report. Next up, that concludes our discussion information items. Next up would be other business. Is there any recommendations for future committee meetings? Anybody? Ready, if you come up with any, email me and Darren and we will get on the schedule. That concludes our meeting.